Followed Equestria, Lonely Roads. Chapter 1, Impressionable Minds. You touch it, you buy it. We take cash or credit. They say that every pony has a special talent, something that makes them belong. Of course, finding out what is another thing entirely. There's not so much to do in a trainee camp in the middle of the desert. The most interesting views you can get inside 4 huge walls amount to a herd of Brahmin or a bunch of clouds. None are very interesting, and watching either gets boring pretty quickly. Trust me, I've tried. If you have the caps, you can at least do some trading. Maybe buy something entertaining. The key word here being if. I can't remember the last time I had money to buy something other than what I needed for food. No surprise people don't stick around long. Usually stop by to stock up on food and water and then head off in whichever direction they feel like. Me? No such luxury. It wasn't so bad for the first couple of years. I was small, and the camp was large, so I got to exploring everywhere I could. It was fun for a while. Then I grew up a bit more, and the world got all that much smaller. Most days would end up with a good session of brick counting, almost as exhilarating as watching clouds. Add to that the fact there were no other foals in the camp, and you might start to see why I wasn't exactly happy with being stuck in the same place year after year. Still, it didn't mean I couldn't get creative. High. Very high. Very, very high. I looked down at the ground again and shut my eyes. Very, very much too high. The ground stretched out before me, shifting and swirling, threatening to swallow me up. I put my hooves over my eyes and whimpered. The tower I was sitting on gave a small creak as it moved slightly in the wind. I held to the railings for dear life. This was a stupid idea in every sense of the word. Any idea involving an extremely high place always has to be a stupid idea. Though, considering who'd fought up the idea, I guess that didn't say a lot about me either. It was such a simple plan. Get a rope between the tower and the wall, attach self to rope, step off, and slide to freedom. I'd been fine until just after step 2. That was when I looked down and saw tiny dots moving around below me. My mind had pretty much refused to cooperate after that. I slowly opened my eyes. No panicking. That was a good start. Then I tried standing up. The world swam before my eyes, and I collapsed to the ground with my hooves over my head. Too high. I opened my eyes. That was still okay. Instead of standing, I tried crawling slowly towards the edge, my harness clinking in response. It put together hastily with straps of leather and bits of scrap left lying around. Only now did I remind myself how stupid that was. I looked below me and then immediately wished I hadn't. Below me was the camp, with ant-sized dots moving bustling about, small herds of tiny Brahmin faintly mooing, ponies talking and yelling. Then there was me, high above them all, about to do something incredibly stupid. I hoped they wouldn't notice. I stood up, determined to make at least one step towards the edge. My head lifted up, and my gaze followed to the view over the walls. The horizon stretched out for miles and miles, with small mountains and hills in the distance. Wind swept up huge clouds of dust and sand, making new dunes and erasing evidence of any previous travelers. The sight gave me the courage I needed. I closed my eyes and ran. The floor fell away beneath my hooves as I fell forward. The line above me jerked as it took my weight. The tower creaked in protest, and I could feel my harness strain as I slid down the line. At first, it was like a gentle slide, but very quickly, I built up speed. I strained to open my eyes as the wind blew past me, and I saw the wall racing towards me very, very quickly. It grew closer and closer. Fear took over as my body seized up, unable to even scream. Even so, as the edge of the wall approached, I could see my target getting nearer and nearer. Outside. That was where I was going. There was an awful twanging sound. I started falling. That was probably when the screaming started. My body unfroze itself and began flailing wildly. Now the ground rushed up to meet me, and it seemed to be moving even faster than the wall. I closed my eyes. Maybe it would just go away. I felt the wind rushing by me as I tumbled through the air. There was a loud thwomp. After about 5 minutes, I realized I was still breathing. As I opened one eye, I could also confirm I was still able to see. I also found that my other eye was still working. The dull gray sky was still above me. I reached out with one of my hooves. That was still working too. So did the rest of my limbs. I looked down at the large pale hay I was sitting on. I could see Brahmin a little ways off mooing to themselves. I lay back down and looked back up to the sky. Then I just broke out laughing. "I'm not dead!" I shouted, to no one in particular. The feeling of relief at not being dead was amazing, enough to put a stupid grin on my face. I rolled off my pile of hay and immediately stepped in some Brahmin dung. I stopped smiling. 50 caps. Around the camp, there were ponies of all kinds milling about. Some were making their way through various stalls and stores, looking through goods on display, or shouting at each other about prices. Others were sitting around tables or at a bar, eating campfire-cooked food, swapping increasingly unbelievable stories in hope of a free drink. A few were loading up crates and barrels into carts, or saddling up Brahmin with even more bags, preparing for a long trek against the wastes. And right in front of me, a gray earth pony looked down at me with some disapproval. Kid, it's just a hammer. Nothing special about it." I looked down at the pieces of clutter scattered around me. Bits of metal, spent spark batteries, and a scrap cable made up most of my not-so-fantastic inventory. There was also a hammer, which did indeed look pretty normal. But you see," I said, lifting up the hammer between my hooves. "Could a regular hammer do this?" I swung the hammer down on a large crock and smashed into it. Cracks formed along the point of impact and spread rapidly across the entirety of the rock, splitting it in half and revealing a small cache of gems inside. "Magical gem finding hammer," I said again, as the earth pony's eyes widened slightly. "Only 50 caps." He coughed and looked away, trying very hard to keep a straight face. I was no expert on reading people, but I didn't need to be to tell he was really bad at it. "Nice tool, I suppose," he said, looking back at me. "But it doesn't look too new. Still, I suppose I could take it for 30 caps. 45, I said, almost immediately, which also apparently caught him off guard. He drew back slightly, but recovered. 35, no higher. 40. "Real smart little kid, aren't you?" He proceeded to make a big deal about thinking about it. Complete with a hoof under his chin? I mentally rolled my eyes. "And a couple pieces of scrap. Last offer." With a triumphant flourish, the pony handed the caps over, walked away, hammer in mouth, leaving me considerably richer than I had been several minutes ago. I took a guess at the amount of smashed rocks around camp that would go up quite a bit. 40 caps wasn't an awful lot, relatively, but when you're a young colt who hasn't eaten anything in the past few days, 40 caps opens up a whole range of delicious food options, delicious still being relative, of course. Still, one advantage of being younger was that food portions were also proportionally a lot bigger. A good Brahmin steak could probably last a day or two, provided it didn't grow legs and run away, which actually happened a lot more than I cared to think about. I picked up 2 halves of the rock that had been the victim of my earlier demonstration. The gems in the center glittered, and as I reached out and tapped them, they made a hollow plastic noise. I took out a tube of Wonder Glue and carefully stuck the pieces of rock together again, the cracks fading together. Another advantage I had found, as I stuffed the rock back in my saddlebags, was that other ponies seemed to think that being young somehow meant being more honest. I stuck my helmet back on my head, a round metal dome with various straps and clips hanging off the side. It was also far too big for me. The world went dark for a few seconds before I flicked it up out of my face. I pulled myself on my hooves, yawning and stretching as I did so, and looked around. There were stalls, still brimming with business. Brahmin pens took up more than enough space, and a set of brick buildings barracks and a saloon made up the rest of it. All nicely packaged up in a set of concrete walls, complete with a big sign label emblazoned with the Happy Trails Caravan Camp in massive red lettering. One of the biggest and safest trade hubs in the desert for miles. And it was so boring. Nothing ever happened. Caravans went in and out, goods exchanged hooves, and more ponies just came and left. I took a few steps forward and made my way towards food. My legs disagreed with my plan, and I rolled over onto the floor. I waved my legs feebly in the air. The zipline incident from earlier had been pretty draining. Add that to the hunger, and walking might be really pushing it. I gave up and laid back on the ground, staring up at the sky. Gray clouds stretched in all directions, as far as the eye could see. The missing ceiling of an otherwise complete cell. Small holes appeared and disappeared in the clouds, swirled slowly around. I pulled my helmet down and closed my eyes. The mess hall was really far away after all. Dinner could probably wait a few more hours or so. Tap, tap, tap. Or maybe not. Someone tapped me on the head again. I groaned and shuffled slightly, attempting to convey the "leave me alone" in as few as words as possible. Hey, you stay like that any longer and people might start selling you as radigator meat. The voice came from above. I lifted up my helmet to the face of a unicorn mare, looking down on me, bolted out of the sky. "Hello, Racket," she said, smiling as she loomed over me. There weren't many good things about living in the camp, but the unicorn standing over me was one of them. Her name was Aqua Bloom. She was a caravan merchant, the normal kind who sold things for caps. I had met her, or more accurately, she had found me, as I was testing whether whatever they put in the Brahmin trials was edible. As it turned out, it was, but unfortunately, it also caused me to throw up a lot. Aqua had come over, cleaned me up, and sat me in front of a large bowl of cactus mash. She refused any sort of payment, saying that she just couldn't stand to see children suffering. I had told her I could look after myself. She had just waved a hook and told me I could count on a favor to be repaid. I didn't think she would ever really collect on it. She was the kindest pony I had ever met. She was also staring down at me, expecting a reply. "Hi, Aqua," I replied, or at least I tried to. It sounded a little closer to Apparently, the bits of my face that dealt with the taking still had taken the opportunity to go to sleep, and they weren't very happy about being woken up. Either she understood me, or just thought it was funny, but Aqua giggled at it all the same. My face started to heat up slightly. I coughed and tried to look away. "Sorry," she said, with her hoof in her mouth, still trying to hide a smile. She shook her head, flicking strands of her white mane out of her eyes as she tried to compose herself. "I just want to know why you're taking a nap right out here in the dirt. Your dad forget to pay the rent again?" She tried to pass it off as a joke, but it sounded strained. She looked around the hub, scanning the groups of ponies. "Where is he anyway?" I opened my mouth, but instead of words, there was just a loud rumbling noise that I was pretty sure came from me. Aqua smiled again as I shifted around. "Well, I guess I won't be getting anything out of you until we put some food in you." She grinned and offered a hoof out to me. "Let's get you something to eat. I'm sure your dad would appreciate it." She caught sight of my expression and added, "Well, maybe." She lifted me up, and after a few seconds to make sure I wasn't going to fall over again, we set off towards the mess hall. Or, big tent that smelt worse than Brahmin crap, as I called it. We talked as we trotted along. Me about nothing in particular, and especially not about zip lines, and her talking about her travels in the wastes. She did most of the talking. I listened intently, hanging on every word. "We used to roll out east," she said. "Plenty of stuff I could tell you about out there. The Manhattan ruins, the high-class ponies in 10 Pony Tower, and there's even a bunch of ponies still in the core. Some good trade there, I can tell you." Still, it wasn't the best for a caravan. I heard that off west got pretty light in comparison. Didn't see anything there to prove them wrong. Her smile faded as slightly as she went on. "Of course, we still have our own problems, don't we? Talk about something going on the river, and the slavers are getting more active as well." I turned to look at her as she trailed off. Her mouth was still smiling, but there was a pained look on her face. For a while, we didn't say anything. Sometimes she'd talk about it more, but most of the time, just the mention of slavers was enough to cause the same sad expression to appear. The silence let my mind wander and do some thinking. I kind of envied Aqua in a way, being able to travel to so many places and see so many things. But then again, if it weren't for her, I wouldn't know anything about outside. I'd probably end up going crazy too. She was one of the few in the camp that actually seemed to care about other ponies, and that was saying something. Whenever a caravan passed by, she would come up and stop by for a while. I didn't know what she thought of me, but I just enjoyed being around her, doing simpler things like talking or walking together. Not to mention her long white mane and blue coat, which made her look kind of pretty. Aqua turned to see the sight of me desperately trying to shove my entire head into my helmet. Get any redder, I swear I could sell you as an apple. She held out a hoof and helped me up again. Alligator bait and apples, I said. What else are you trying to plan me to sell me as? Oh, I could probably think up a bunch of other things, she said, giving me an evil look complete with a slightly unnerving grin. She managed to hold it for about a second before we both broke out laughing. A couple of ponies stopped and stared at us. I didn't care. You know, she went on after we both had calmed down, it's too bad I can't bring you anywhere. I think you'd really like it out there. We even have a little filly and her family coming along for the journey. I just nodded. Wasn't much I could do. The camp and its walls were the only life I had. Beyond that, all I knew of the outside from were stories and whatever tattered books I could get my hooves on. I was stuck in almost every sense of the word. The walls that kept the wastes out also kept me in, and I was sick to death of it. The closest I had ever been, apart from that earlier adventure, was just a few steps away from the main gate. The desert stretched out in front of me, hills, rocks, and the horizon in the distance. That was just before my dad had grabbed me and dragged me kicking and screaming back to the barracks. After that, he made sure that the guards knew that I wasn't even on the observation towers were off limit. He didn't even give me a reason, just that it was for my own safety. Screw safety. I was getting out whether my dad liked it or not. Speaking of my dad, we were walking by the saloon when the door burst open and a group of ponies fell through the doorway, kicking and yelling at each other. A gray-blue stallion struggled to the top first and drove his hoof into a unicorn's stomach. He crumpled to the ground just as the bottle-wielding pony took a swing at where he had been standing. Losing his balance, he got a swift kick to the side. He stood up looking pleased with himself. That probably made the shovel to the back of the head even more surprising. The gray unicorn at the bottom of the pile had levitated it up again for a second blow when the earth pony, apparently unfazed by the attack, wrenched it from his telekinetic grasp and smashed against the back of his head. He too fell over, joining the other three on the floor. The gray pony reached down and picked up the straw hat that one of them had been wearing. "And that's why," he said, his words slurring together slightly, "you don't touch my hat." Then he staggered a few steps, threw up, and fell over on the ground. A shining example of pony kind, and almost made me want to laugh. A minute or two later, camp guards came and dispersed the crowd, while others hauled the unconscious pony away. The gray stallion with the hat was sitting up and looking around with a dazed expression and a rather concerned grin on his face. Aqua was wrapping some of his wounds with bandages and trying to get him to drink a healing potion. I was just sitting down to pretend very hard to ignore him. "You look just like my kid, you know. He almost looks exactly like you." He wasn't making this easy. Aqua carefully tied off the last bandages and instead set trying to shake some sense into him. "Slate, that is your son." "Ah, right." Expressions of puzzlement and confusion flashed across his face, until recognition finally dawned, albeit extremely slowly. "Oh, hey, Rocket." He waved at hoof at me while grinning like a maniac. "Hi, Dad." That was all I could say. I just hung my head as Aqua tried to force the potion bottle into his mouth again. He dodged and weaved around it until she just sighed and gave up. For a heavy drinker, he didn't really appreciate drinking very much. He'll need a trip to the infirmary, but otherwise, he'll just be fine, she said, giving me a weak smile. Honestly, I'm surprised he doesn't have a concussion right about now. I looked over him again. Messy, dark brown mane, tail, and dark blue eyes. It was like looking in a mirror, if that mirror added about 40 years, and then changed all the colors around, and then swapped our hats around. Actually, probably not the best analogy. He did look slightly dazed, though, smiling at anything and everything. Now was as good a chance as any. Time for Plan A. "Hey, Dad?" I asked, trying to sound as casual as possible. "What?" he replied, his eyes drifting until they focused on me. Or partly on me, at least. Hi, Racket. Would you mind telling this unicorn to buzz off?" "Dad, that's Aqua. You know her." "Oh, right. Hey, ya." He gave Aqua a grin and a wave. She sighed and gave a small wave in reply. I just sighed. "I'm gonna get him something for the bruises. Just sit tight and look after him, okay?" I nodded as Aqua walked off. That was just left my dad and me. "Pretty little gal, ain't she?" "What?" "She looks a bit old for you, though." He just sat and grinned his manic grin at me. "Anyway," I said, trying to bring the conversation back to normality, "I just wanted to talk about me getting out of camp." "No." I blinked. His expression had changed from a grinning idiot to dead serious in less than a second. He shook his head. "I told you before, you can't go out there." But Dad, if I stay here, I'll..." My mind grasped at concepts I plucked out from the muddles of mess ideas in my head. "I'll never get my cutie mark." "Too dangerous. Besides, there's plenty of work to do here. You'll find what your talent is in good time." "I've already tried everything." Sincerity was easy, mostly because it was true. He stared at me for a while, his face still. Eventually, he lowered his head, eyes covered by his hat. "Fine then," he muttered. "What would you do if you got out?" That was easy. I would, My mind drew a blank. I trailed off. I stayed up all of last night, poring over a magazine about talking, but as much as I tried, whatever I picked up seemed to suddenly evaporate from my memory. "Do things?" I said eventually, giving him a sheepish grin. "Things?" He shook his head in response. "Sorry, kid. No can do." Damn it. So much for that. "It's just for your safety," he said as he slowly raised to his feet. "The waste ain't a playground. Maybe when you're older, kid. Just not now." I just sat there with my head down. I should have guessed nothing I said would change his mind. He just wanted me safe. Tired, hungry, and near crazy from boredom, but safe. Screw safety. After a while, Aqua came back and took him to the infirmary. My dad back to his normal state of slightly crazy drunk. That left me sitting outside with nothing but broken pieces of door for company. On the bright side, at least I could go get some dinner now. "Hey, you there," came a gruff voice from behind me. I turned to see the saloon's owner, what's-his-face, looking down at me. That wasn't actually his name, but he was definitely looking at me, and he definitely didn't look very happy. "You're Slate's kids, right?" I nodded glumly. Any conversation involving my dad usually didn't end well. "Yeah, well," he flipped open a notebook and scanned through it. "He said you'd pick up his tab." My mouth hung open. 5, 10, yeah, 20 caps for the drinks. His gaze moved to the piece of wood scattered on the ground. "That'll be 20 for the door as well." I didn't bother arguing as I handed over the caps. It wasn't worth it. A few hours later, and 40 caps lighter, I dragged myself around the camp for the umpteenth time. Light was fading, and some ponies had already packed up for the night. That didn't include me, of course. A bed at the barracks cost at least 15 caps a night. Not exactly wallet breaking, but when you're broke, you're broke. It felt like I had a dark cloud hanging over my head. I looked up just to make sure. Nope, just regular clouds. Damn. I managed to reach the cattle pins before I collapsed, stomach growling like a sick Brahmin. Huh. Despite it all, I could still make some jokes. Take that, world. Crawling up to the feeding troughs, I glanced inside, looking for anything remotely edible, violently sickness or not. There was nothing. Not even a chewed-up carrot. Well, that was that then. I flopped back on the ground and closed my eyes. Sleep was marginally more preferable to a gnawing hunger. You're going to get them all killed. Okay. No sleep for me either. I got up, just in time to see the door slam open and a red unicorn mare dressed in leather armor storm out of the building. Spark, be reasonable. Another unicorn mare appeared at the doorway, gray with a brush-backed white mane. Spark cut her off, rounding on her. No, Glass, you be reasonable. Your stupid delivery is going to kill them all. It's Miss Looking Glass to you, she said, adjusting a set of glasses perched on her nose. And just remember that it was your sister who agreed to it. The gray unicorn turned away and shut the door behind her. Damn it! A bucket slammed into a nearby wall as Spark decided to start ripping apart her surroundings. I yelped and jumped behind a trowel as signs and posts followed, along with anything not nailed down. By the time she had calmed down, it looked like someone had set off a bomb. Then another one. I peeked over the edge of the trowel and saw her breathing heavily in the center of the destruction. She really didn't seem in the best mood. I tried my best to sneak away. That's when my stomach decided to rumble loudly. Who's that? Spark snapped around, levitating a pistol at my hiding place. You've got 5 seconds before I start firing, and I'll warn you right now, I am pissed off. It was a choice between bullets or a really angry mare. It wasn't much of a choice. I crawled out slowly from behind my hiding place and moved to a soft lamplight. It took her a few steps with her gun still trained on me before she deemed me not a threat. The look of abject terror I had probably helped as well. Ugh, you. I could have guessed. She sighed as she holstered her pistol. I felt my staff start to breathe again. No one ever seemed happy to see me. Word of advice, kid. Don't sneak up on me. Spark turned around and started to walk off. I tagged along behind her. It wasn't as if I had much else to do. Spark was the head of security in camp. That meant she dealt with my dad on a day-to-day basis. I was somewhat of a lesser concern, but since she was also Aqua's sister, I got an extra special supervision whenever she was around. Less for protection against me, but rather the amount of trouble I seemed to attract. Considering my day, I didn't really blame her. What was all the shouting about? I asked, moving up alongside her. Nothing. Nothing? You almost shot me. She waved a hoof dismissively. I meant nothing a kid like you should be worrying about. But she was talking to your sis, wasn't she? The look I got back told me I should probably stop prying any further. I gulped and got back to silently walking. Oh, what the hell. It's not like you won't hear it from her later. Besides, I need to vent a little bit. With the cracking of what had been a signpost a few minutes ago under hoof, I agreed with her. The annual caravan journey out east is coming up tomorrow. You know about that, right? I nodded. It was one of the biggest events in the year. 50 or more wagons loaded with supplies heading off on a long trek across the desert. The east was apparently in bad shape, something to do with it being the main target of most of the war bombs. I didn't know much about it, but from what I had heard, there had been explosions and fire everywhere. Sounded cool to me. Spark continued talking. Yeah, well, standard procedure. We send out part of the camp guard to go along with them. They get there and make it back up, and everyone is happy. Sometimes we got a couple people who wait a little on personal deliveries just to join up. That's fine. Ain't much effort to protect a couple more wagons. But Looking Glass, in her infinite freaking wisdom, decided to delay all this year's deliveries to today. Said it was for efficiency. The way her eyes blazed, I feared she might start destroying things again. Thankfully, she just sighed and continued. Nah, she just wanted to scrap every last cap she could. So now we've got over twice as many wagons to protect and hardly enough guards, as if we didn't need to be more attractive targets to raiders. Maybe I wouldn't have minded. I mean, anyone stupid enough to go along with it deserves everything that happens to him. But then Aqua turns up and says she wants to tag along with her own wagon. Now I've got her life hanging on it, and Glass won't even let me assign any more guards. Instead, she brings in the freaking freelancers. I swear, half of them don't even know which end of a gun the bullets come out of. So yeah, I'm not really a happy pony right now. She hung her head and gave a deep sigh. Oh yeah, and I'm sorry for almost shooting you. Hardly anyone was around by now. The camp was dark, and the only real light was the soft orange glow given off by the burning oil lamps. We walked behind the back of one of the administrative buildings. It was the quickest way to get back to the guard barracks. I was almost glad to see night come. At least it would be easier to get some sleep, hunger problems notwithstanding. It also meant I didn't notice Spark had stopped walking until I bumped into her. The way she stood stock still, she had either noticed something wrong, or had suddenly turned to stone. I was inclined to believe the former, if only I could hear her breathing. We're being followed, she whispered to me. Stick close and follow my lead. She started walking again. I fought the urge to look behind me and kept close alongside her. Fear of the unknown. That's what they say you're truly afraid of. I didn't know who they were, but they were partly like... My hair prickled, along with a gnawing sense of unease. I sped up my walk. Suddenly, Spark jumped backwards. There was a sickening crack sound, and then a pony crying out in pain. I turned and saw a gray pony lying on the ground, hooves over a bloody face. Next to him was a knife, along with Spark, pointing her gun at his head. All right, knife boy, why the hell are you following us? Fuck off, he replied. It sounded like he'd bitten his tongue. Looking at the knife, I guess it was probably more than bitten. All that earned him was a swift kick in the nether regions, eliciting another loud cry. I'm here for a kid, he shouted as Spark raised her leg again. The colt pointed at me. She lowered her hoof and turned to me instead. Know this guy, do you? I shook my head. To be fair, I hardly knew any ponies around the camp. Still, he did look familiar. I saw a hara. A hara? A hagar. A har-har. A ha-har. A hammer? Wait. Oh, right, I said, raising a hoof. He's the guy I sold the fake hammer to. I know it, the gray pony shouted. Get him! Two ponies jumped out in front of us, one holding a large sledgehammer in his mouth and the other levitating a cattle prod. Oh. Whoops. What the... Spark was cut off as the gray pony smacked the pistol out of her grip. It clattered somewhere in the darkness as the two of them charged us. He got a hoof to his stomach for his trouble. Get down! Spark shouted at me as she nearly ripped a lamp off the wall with her magic. I didn't hear her. All I noticed were the two ponies charging towards me. My brain screamed at me to move, but my body refused to move. I saw a wall rushing up towards me. The sledgehammer pony reached her first and took a swing. Dodging to the right, she brought a lantern round into his head and threw him off balance. There was a loud crack as the glass smashed against his head. Sledgehammer pony went down with a thud. I blinked. Everything had gone dark. The lamp not in any condition to be working anymore. A shout came from the dark. Hey kid, you still okay? Came Spark's voice. Well, if you card being stared skiff as okay, then yeah, sure. Hold on. A light flared in front of me and Spark appeared, slightly in front of me. Can't see a damn thing, or the rest of them. She turned her head, and the light from her horn swept around. Yeah! I watched as Spark leapt into the path of the quadruped. She fell onto the floor, twitching slightly. The unicorn then turned to face me, bringing the cattle prod around for another swing. something snapped inside me, breaking whatever paralysis had taken over me. I started to run, closing the distance between me and the unicorn. He swung the cattle prod around, just as I threw myself at him. I felt the cattle prod brush against my side. The shock traveled across my body, muscles starting to contract involuntarily. It didn't matter. I didn't need them anymore. The look on the unicorn's face as I slammed into him, helmet first, must have been quite a sight. Unfortunately for me, all I heard was a loud thud, and then another as I hit the ground. My mouth tasted dirt. Dirt didn't taste very nice. Why did I taste dirt? I lifted my head. Oh right, I'm on the ground. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Spark getting shakily to her feet. That was good. Then my head frothed, and blackness started to creep into the edges of my vision. That was probably not so good. There was a dull buzzing sound in my ears as I felt myself slipping away. The last thing I felt was searing pain across my head as I sank into the darkness. Blink, please. I blinked. Light shone in my eyes as the unicorn flashed a small light in my face. Look left. I had woken up in the infirmary, head still slightly sore. Aqua had been there, as well as Spark, the former fussing about whether I was okay, the latter seeming indifferent about it. Now right. After I blacked out, Spark had rounded up the ones who had attacked us and managed to get them locked up pending further investigation. Seeing how parts of her mane still refused to lay down straight, I was guessing it was probably going to be a long time coming. And blink. I blinked. The unicorn floated the torch away from my eyes as I rubbed them. No signs of concussion? You'll be thankful to know. Knowing who you've got as a father, though, I wouldn't be surprised. She dismissed me and turned to look at Spark instead. I don't suppose I'll be finding out how you two got these injuries at all? No. The nurse just shook her head and sighed. No, I didn't expect so. Look, I need the bed for late-night drugs. You're fine, so if you don't mind. That's how we ended outside. The night had settled, cold air sweeping through the camp, the only light coming from a small number of lamps casting their orange glow. I heard Spark come up next to me and give a small cough. You gonna get into any more trouble tonight? She asked as she sat down next to me. Or am I gonna have to lock you up too? Dunno, I said with a grin. Are you gonna get your mane any more spiky? I guess from the look that I got back, that she probably wasn't. You just concentrate on not selling people any more magical items, got it? I nodded as well as I could with her muzzle pressed up against mine. Good. Well then, I'm going off to get the guards ready. She drew away as I managed to start breathing again. I watched her walking away, and then as she turned back towards me... Oh, and thanks, kid, she said, staring at the ground. Then slightly louder with a smirk continued. Nice way to use your head. I winced as a flash of pain streaked across my head as she turned away and walked off. I shivered, partly from the cold, and partly from the sudden loneliness. This was replaced by a sudden warmth as someone put their hooves around me. You did well today, Racket. Or at least, that's what I heard. Aqua said as she pulled me closer. I felt my face start to burn. I need to go get ready for tomorrow, but I promise I'll see you again soon, okay? She gave me a small smile. I couldn't manage to look at her at the back. Yeah, okay, I murmured in reply. She smiled at me again, and then walked off towards the rows of wagons. I watched as she walked away, the warmth fading more quickly than I would have liked. That just left me sitting outside by myself. It seemed to be happening a lot lately. There wasn't much I could do apart from head back to the barracks. Today had certainly been interesting. Pony trying to kill me was certainly a bad point. Not to mention losing all my caps. That was just him being him. Good points with being with Aqua, and also Spark, who probably ended up disliking me less. My mind rabbled on until I reached the large half-cylinders that made up the barracks. The doors weren't an option for me. They charged caps for bed and entry, and somehow I was running low. I moved around to the back of the building instead. A few boxes and barrels, nothing out of the ordinary, but they were my only way inside. I clambered up the pile of boxes and quietly opened a small window, rectangular and flat and just big enough for me to squeeze through. I squeezed through and climbed down the stack of boxes on the other side, or at least I should have. Still, I fell and landed on a flood in the floor. The pain was a good reminder to look where I was going as I shifted the boxes stacked right just to the right of the window. Moving through the darkness, I fumbled around the walls until my hoof hit the light switch. A ceiling lamp flickered a few times and then grew slowly, casting a yellow glow on the room. Stacks of shelves on my left held various pieces of scrap machinery and a row of odd-looking books, where bits of metal and tools lay clattered on the floor. There was a mattress curled up in the corner, complete with a rather patchy blanket and pillow. Home sweet cupboard. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Well, mostly mine. At least no one knew I was here. The only door had been rusted shut a long time ago, leaving a hidden, if not completely comfortable space. It was small, but some small paintings and deserts of landscapes helped it make it feel bigger. It was a comforting place. I shucked off my saddlebags and tipped the contents onto the floor. The amount of clutter on the floor grew substantially. I moved the clutter to somewhat similar piles and then stretched out on the mattress. It felt good to lie down after what happened today. I curled up and pulled the blanket over me. Sleep was very welcome. Ugh, hold on. Alarm, right. Gotta turn that off. Silence. Much better. Now, why is it still dark? I tugged off the blanket and stood up. It is indeed still dark outside. Stupid clock! I shouted at the inanimate object. A hand popped off as I moved to its hooves. I guess it didn't help that it was held together with duct tape. I just sighed. Well, since I was up, I figured I should get something done. I shifted the piles of junk on the floor. List. Ah, here we go. Number 1, get caps. Yeah, that didn't really go so well. Next point, get food. Not going to happen too soon. Third point, collect materials. I looked around at the piles of clutter around me. At least they weren't as short as that. Some piles that seemed to have actually grown while I was asleep. The last thing on the list read second note. After searching on the floor for a few more minutes, I found it tacked on the wall instead. Find weapon? I read out loud. Why would I need that? I racked my brain for answers. The rest of the list was pretty incomprehensible, probably due to a lack of decent writing tools. The only reason I could think of to need a weapon would be my thoughts drifted off to my earlier escape attempt, and also the journey over to the east. That was happening today, wasn't it? Something sparked inside my brain. Oh right, I couldn't believe I'd forgotten. Though starting at around how many notes I had made, I suspected I'd probably had done. I spun to look at the window. The first signs of light were beginning to creep through the darkness. I was going to have to work quickly. A few minutes of gathering behind provided me with a set of junk that's somewhere between a usual condition. A rusted paint gun in the corner grabbed my eye. I gripped it and waved it around a bit. It seemed fairly stable and mechanics were all there. Now all it really needed was a few additions. I grabbed a screwdriver in my mouth and got to work. I clambered out of the window a couple minutes later, saddlebags in tow. The plan was very simple. Get on a wagon, hide, and I'd finally be out of here within the hour. I'd packed my bags, though not with as many supplies as I had hoped. Honestly, I was more concerned about getting out. I crept around, peeking around buildings, making my way towards the wagon area. It was early dawn, but there were still a number of ponies getting prepared for the trip. And some guards, it seemed. Spark must not have given the whole stay behind speech much thought. I moved to the holding pens just next to the wagons, where there were still some cattle. Asleep, thankfully.
Moo, I say. Okay, mostly asleep then. I turned around to find a two-headed creature staring down at me. Well, half staring. Yet it seemed preoccupied with chewing on something. Don't see many ponies out this time in the morning. How are you doing? The head that was focused on me said. Shh, I replied, trying to focus on the movements of the camp guards. Well, mighty rude now, ain't it? Ain't that just rude, Herbert? The other head, presumably named Herbert, continued chewing, apparently oblivious to the conversation. Just shush. I'm trying to be quiet. Hey, who's out there? The voice had come from one of the guards over by the wagons. I yelped and tried to hide behind one of the feeding troughs. Young people today, no manners at all. The Brahmin continued unbated. I mean, when I was just a calf, ponies used to greet me with at least a hello, and they just didn't load up with me with bags without asking, and... Shh! You're gonna blow my cover! The head continued its rants, ignoring my attempts to make it quiet. As I peeked out from behind my hiding place, I saw a couple of unicorn guards getting closer, hordes glowing in the faint morning light. And they make us walk for so long without a break. It's not as if we don't get tired, and some of them even use muzzles. Can you even imagine the indignity? The Brahmin seemed to be completely ignoring me now. As much as it was annoying, I surprised myself when I pulled out a modified paint gun and pulled the trigger. There was a small twang sound, and a dart flew through the air and sailed over the Brahmin. Another twang, and the second dart hit it on the side. And another thing, I really don't see why... It collapsed on the ground in a sprawl, heads flopping to both sides. At least one of them was snoring faintly as the sleeping drought did its work. The good news was that meant my new dart gun worked. The bad news was that I only had a couple of darts left, and I hadn't even left yet. That and the guards were still getting closer. I held my breath as the guard came up right next to my hiding spot. Faint light swept around the pens, and then again. Nothing here, just the cattle, said one voice. Yeah? Then what do you think spooked them? Said another. How the hell am I supposed to know? Look, let's just get back before our boss chooses out for leaving our post. The light swept around for the final time, and then faded. The sound of who's walking away was accompanied by the returning of my breathing. Crisis averted, for now at least. But I still needed to get over to the wagons. I looked around again, trying to take in all the details. A large wall and gate was to my left, while the rest of the camp stretched out back to the right. The holding area was directly opposite from where I was, with a dirt trail in between them, but it was being patrolled by several guards. Failing sudden powers of invisibility, that meant the direct route was out of the question. Ponies were still loading crates and barrels onto wagons. I also noticed a small pile of sunrise sarsaparilla crates, stacked up to the wall next to me. I moved up them and prized open the lid. The top crate was empty, save for a few bottles. There was an obvious plan here. Still, my stomach was doing somersaults at the mere thought of it. The outside was so near, a low voice in my head said. It's right there. Just climb inside. I couldn't. Or maybe I could. It was the only way. But I might get noticed. But maybe that didn't matter. I must have spent ages just standing there, holding the lid of that crate. I could have probably spent ages more if the sound of hoofsteps getting nearer didn't cause me to stop arguing with myself. I leapt inside and brought the lid back down over me. It was dark, cramped. I hardly had enough room to move my legs. My heart was pounding, partially from fear, but mostly from the feeling of the crate pushing into me. My breathing quickened. The sides of the crate seemed to shrink. Then came something worse than being stuck in a small place. Being stuck in a small place and being thrown around. Something that I suspected the pony that lived in me didn't know. There was a minute of shaking and floating, followed by a sharp throw and a thwomp. Then I was alone. Muffled sounds still floated through the wooden paddles, along with the bumps of items being loaded, but they all felt so distant. The waiting was agonizing. I didn't dare open the lid of the crate for fear of being found, but any longer I probably would scream. Then there was a bump, and a creak of the wheel as it turned underneath. The relatively smooth ride continued for a while, and gave way to harsher ground, rattling crates and making me all too aware of the panels still around me. Carefully, I lifted myself up, the crate's lids creaking in response. From the crack in the box, I could see the dirt being kicked up behind the wagon and the massive gate of the company behind us. Gradually, the image shrunk before me, leaving me with a view of the world around me. The desert stretched out for miles around. Mountains and cliffs towered off into the distance. The clouds seemed even higher than before. It was amazing. There were no other words for the world beyond the walls. The shock of the outside was quickly replaced by a sudden sense of tiredness. Not sleeping for more than an hour can apparently do that to you. I clambered out of the crate and sprawled over whatever space was left and closed my eyes. I had made it. A smile crept across my face before the darkness of sleep washed over me. Footnote. New trait. Claustrophobia. You have a fear of enclosed space. Being indoors causes you to work less efficiently, but you excel in wide open spaces. Reader's notes. Yeah, this is my longest audiobook yet, and I feel I've done a good job here. I'm quite proud of it. It took me 2 days of recording, altogether maybe, I don't want to say 4 or 5 hours. But I really like this story. I hope you guys do. Yeah, that's pretty much all. So, see you guys later. Bye.